We should acknowledge in the introduction that interrupt is an experiment in feeling the computation of our bodies.
I like that as a first sentence.
We should talk about how we have similar ways of thinking, but no framework for our thoughts.
Online, our conversations take place in the past. Offline, we are haunted.
Simone Weil, of all the human soul's needs, none is more vital than the past.
But I delete my browsing data because history is private.
What happens when artists stop being polite and start interrupting each other?
19 artists picked to perform in a 38,815 square foot, 3-story interdisciplinary art center and to have their performances taped.
Is this an essay?
I think this is an essay.
We are curating a 2-day essay.
This essay will contain lectures, performances, videos, music, snacks, syncopes, walls, pencils, discontinuities, paradoxes, bodies, currency, forms, water, and us.
In this essay, we desire ambivalence and to be less declarative.
Our intuition is that this clause should be followed by something lyrical yet undercut by animal rage.
Seriously, though, where do we put our anger?
We don't want to give it to status updates.
Claire wants to hit the earth with a bat.
This prospect does not make Thea feel better.
What is the quietest space in late capitalism?
We are typing this there.
We are not alone, but we are by ourselves.
We should acknowledge in the introduction that we took up the habit of encouraging each other to have the best mornings and the best days in our text messages organizing the festival. Have such a good day, Thea.
Have such a good day, Claire.
An affectation learned to soften the constant pinging of demanded attention.
In affectation, learn to call back our softness, while constantly showing up to each other as blue rectangles and serif fonts.
We should acknowledge in the introduction John Cayley, the godfather of digital language art, a Derridian with kind blue eyes who never makes anyone feel intellectually inferior despite his breadth of knowledge.
He knows so much.
But listens so carefully. I always feel like he's willing to share, to simplify, to meet me where I am.
We should acknowledge in the introduction Annika Olsen, who texted, "What are you feeling? Re-graphic design interrupt," and then transformed my half-formed thoughts, which I remember were electricity, nobodies, it's dawn, into a beautiful web platform and a series of posters and brochures. Also, through her research, she discovered that AstroTurf was invented in Providence.
We should acknowledge in the introduction Pratt Institute, particularly Beth Lafreda, chair of the writing program, and Andrew Barnes, dean of the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Pratt generously provided financial support to send 9 students and 2 faculty members to Interrupt and is supporting the festival. On Thursday, April 18th, in Brooklyn, there will be an Interrupt at Pratt event, a continuation of this conversation.
We should acknowledge in the introduction Interrupt's volunteer moderators, who so brilliantly provided frames for the festival sessions and helped keep conversation afloat.
We should acknowledge in the introduction the RISD and Brown professors, John Cayley, Marilee Armstrong-Rial, Paul Suellis, and Sawako Nakayasu, who have labored in various ways on behalf of Interrupt, gifting us with their time, energy, enthusiasm, organization, and intelligence.
We should acknowledge in the introduction all of the people at Granoff and the Brown Arts Initiative who are housing this event.
We should acknowledge in the introduction the Brown Literary Arts Department, Gail Nelson, Lori Baker, and Jenny Witt, without whom there would be no checks to pay participants, no promotion done online, and no wine sitting in the lobby right now waiting for us.
We should acknowledge that our Interrupt collaboration came about because we intended to curate a series called Recontainment in New York City. For that series, we drafted part 1 of this statement in Claire's living room while eating morning foods.
There was a cat, there were numerous houseplants, the sun was bright, and our unconscious minds were entangling. We did not know what would come of it at the time, but Interrupt did.
We should acknowledge in the introduction that you, Claire, were the first stranger who ever curated my art into a public program. That at first I thought you might have been part of a complex email scam meant to trick 22-year-olds into giving out their personal information. But no, you are not a scam. You are brilliant, brave, operating with a vision, and a huge inspiration as to how one can be in a body. I've come to look up to your writing, your pedagogy, your sincerity, and your care, and the lines of poetry you create between text messages about bus routes and the price of hotel group rates. It's been a pleasure to do this with you.
We should acknowledge in the introduction the beautiful and immense labor that you, Thea, put into Interrupt. Hours and hours and hours of work. Really, she did so much work. I think people should clap for Thea. Miles and miles of long-distance running, phone calls to obscure budgetary offices, phone calls to Granoff, phone calls to artists, email after email after email, really so many emails. Always warm, conversation marked as important, becoming Xerox, becoming glossy, becoming text. I deeply admire Thea's artistic practice, her sense of humor, her exuberance, her bottomless reserve of energy, and her curatorial prowess. And I should have said those all in the second person. your. I'm in awe of the way she so gracefully pulled this festival off. Thank you for thinking with me and us about digital language art and embodying a radical vision of its future. Here's to many more collaborations to come.
Now we're married. Last but not least, we should acknowledge in the introduction all of you, the Interrupt attendees of 2019, a year of fortune and luck. For we are together broadcasted in space, mediated by Providence, Rhode Island, a state in New England that's known for its sandy shores and seaside towns, known even as the Ocean State.
US and New England, Rhode Island and Providence. These are some names for this place we've convened, but these names do not tell the whole story of this place. As an expression of gratitude to those whose land we're on, we would like to acknowledge the territory of the Narragansett and the Wampanoag tribes on which we are gathering and learning today.
Okay. Thank you, and we're pleased to invite Harper Shalloe onto the stage to introduce Jackie Wang.
Hi, everyone. I was going to try and make a joke about interrupting all of your conversations to give this introduction, but there was an introduction before me, so I'm not going to do that. I am thrilled to be here to introduce to you tonight's speaker, Jackie Wang. Jackie Wang is a poet and performer, a prison abolitionist, a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of African and African American Studies at Harvard University, and a quote-unquote library rat. And I like this descriptor especially because the Rockefeller Library here is filled with mousetraps. So maybe we can think about like radical interspecies rodent kinship in library ecologies later. She's the author of zines and anthologies, including On Being Hard Femme, Tiny Spelunker of the Onero Womb, and the forthcoming collection of tweets, The Twitter Hive Mind is Dreaming. And she's also, of course, the author of Carceral Capitalism, which we will get to hear about as soon as I stop talking. Carceral Capitalism is a deceptively small book, but one whose margins can fortunately accommodate the fervent note-taking that it occasions. Through poetry and prose, a combination indispensable to the book's abolitionist vision, Wang delineates carcerality as the diagram of contemporary racial capitalism, thinking mass incarceration and the ultimately unparadoxical dispersal of containment through both political economy and the effective investments in white supremacy that spill over it. We are witnessing, and many are feeling and weathering, the diffusion of logics and practices of carcerality throughout our late capitalist life worlds, the expansion of imprisonment not only in the numbers of people whose lives it has come to structure, but in its reach into areas of global finance, local governance, and data science from which it might have once seemed at some remove. And yet, shockingly, Deleuze was a little bit right when he claimed in the famed postscript that prisons were finished. Rather than its replacement by more minute and modular forms of control, however, Wang shows how still pervasive physical confinement coexists and cooperates with distributed technologies of keeping track that delimit movements of many sorts, whether through urban space or up the ladder of life chances. Indeed, carcerality is the atmosphere of racial capitalism, the toxicity to which dispossessed and disposable bodies are exposed, the fugitive breath of those populations whose plunder funds the financial order of things. Wang also crucially elucidates carceral capitalism's predictive production of racialized riskiness, the making and management of risky futures through predatory lending, preemptive policing, and the biopolitics of juvenility. The debt economy, the ascendancy of algorithmic security, and the specter of the super predator emerge in her astute analysis as claims on and to individual and collective futures, practices that guarantee cycles of debt and loss, that target bodies in certain spaces for preemptive debilitation, and that deny young persons the possibility of conceiving and after to incarceration. And Wang makes plain that these processes of prediction aim not at staving off risk, but rather cultivating it, inviting racialized subjects into the fold of finance capital and the sea of big data in order to ensure that the future is risky and therefore profitable. It is ever more urgent, then, that we conjure up those futures all but foreclosed by the performativity of prediction, those futures without prisons that linger precariously at the edge of imagination. As Wang so elegantly writes in her final chapter, quote, "The prison itself is a problem for thought that can only be unthought, using a mode of thinking that does not capitulate to the realism of the present," end quote. So in the spirit of thinking together and thinking otherwise, thinking toward just futures beyond the criminal justice system, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Jackie Wang.
Thank you for that lovely introduction and for emphasizing the library rat part of the bio. It's funny because when I was writing the introduction to my book, I was in Paris working at the Pompidou Library, and there's actually a little rat that lives in the library, and I would see when I would go drink coffee and be like, oh, it's Ratatouille, but I don't know what the rat's name was. And also that the intro to the intro was also great. I feel like you both have more weird relationships with your analysts than I have, and I would love to talk to you about it after the talk. It's really funny, because it's really weird having a psychoanalyst and talking about them outside of the room. But I'm going to talk a little bit today about a topic adjacent to my book, and I'm going to pick up on some themes that I also raised in my book, Carceral Capitalism. And so I kept kind of switching between different topics for this talk, because I know that it's like a mixed media festival, and so I was like, am I appearing as a theorist or an artist? But I guess I'm going to try to mix them up a little bit together tonight. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about time and prisons and think a little bit about carceral temporalities outside of prisons as well. And this is something that I started thinking about while writing my book, Carceral Capitalism, and in particular, a section of the book called Ripples in Time. So in this section, I kind of write about some of my personal experiences, kind of living in the shadow of the prison system, and in particular, the experience of having a sibling who's incarcerated. So my brother was in prison at age 17. He was given a juvenile life without parole sentence. So I was 16 at the time. So we were both, just teenagers in high school. And while I was finishing the book, I had to go to Florida to attend his resentencing hearing. So this is kind of something that happened in the wake of the Miller versus Alabama Supreme Court decision, where they determined that mandatory juvenile life without parole was unconstitutional, but that still left open the possibility of resentencing juveniles to discretionary life without parole. So really all that it changed was, and it varies from state to state, but in Florida, where my brother is incarcerated, all that it changed was that it made it so that juveniles, or people who are sentenced as juveniles to life without parole, had to have a resentencing hearing. And they also had to have the same judge oversee the hearing as well. So this is a very surreal experience for me, because this was, let's see, I'm 31 now, and this was 2 years ago. I was 16 when my brother was locked up, and so I was testifying, or I actually didn't get to testify because the hearing was interrupted, but I was before the same judge. And so I was reflecting kind of on my path through life and my brother's path through life, and kind of how we've diverged in the years since he was locked up. And I was started to think about the kind of different rhythms that govern our lives. So in prison, time is very regimented, so everything's kind of regulated by, a specific time that you have to wake and go to sleep and eat your meals and have access to recreation. And my brother's primary mode of communication until very recently was through letters and, occasional 15-minute expensive phone calls. And, for me, I can kind of basically talk to anyone around the world at any moment. And there's a way in which my life has been hyper accelerated by the pace that is set by developments in communication technology, and specifically by just having a smartphone. And so I also have been thinking about the rhythm of existing with a smartphone, the way that these apps that we use on our phones are designed such that they administer intermittent rewards. And so this is really training you to get accustomed to a particular rhythm of inhabiting the world. And so I'm also interested in what that tempo forecloses politically, and how can you disrupt these imposed tempos. And it's interesting because in the conclusion of my book, Carceral Capitalism, I use poetry, and this is kind of the outro of the book. And a lot of people ask me about my relationship to language, because poets love to talk about language. And I said, for me, I was thinking more about rhythm and different ways of creating rhythms collectively and creating different vibrational experiences that create openings. So Sun Ra is someone who I've been very inspired by as well, because he's like the philosopher of vibes, and I vibe with that. And so I also, in the book, write about predictive policing technology, which I'll talk a little bit about tonight and the temporality of debt as well, because what these credit instruments like student loans, credit cards, and new instruments that are being created like job mortgages, what these instruments essentially enable is for the creditor to own the debtor's future. So I'm also interested in how that kind of shapes the direction that our lives take, and also what rhythm or tempo is set by living in this debt economy. And I end this talk with a meditation on strategies developed to resist imposed carceral time through the creation of a rhythm of revolt, revolutionary prophecy. And for me, revolutionary prophecy is the act of creating an opening in time by projecting yourself into the future in order to manifest the latent possibilities embedded in all duration. So without any more rambling, this is Carceral Temporalities and the Politics of Dreaming. So funny because you've been looking at the entire PowerPoint before it even started. So tonight I hope to offer an analysis of carceral power that focuses on the axis of time and the weaponization of time as an instrument of social control. When comparing the Southern convict lease system to contemporary mass incarceration, historian Alex Lichtenstein writes that prison life in the late 19th century and early 20th century was characterized by hard labor, while modern prison life is best described as hard time. While the use of a temporal punishment may appear to be more humane than physical punishment, this regime of control is just as cruel insofar as it is a total attack on the subjectivity and the psyche of the prisoner. Furthermore, supplanting a corporeal regime of punishment with a temporal one enables prisons to maintain their moral legitimacy because the damage done by temporal punishment is not legible in our current framework for understanding harm and pain. This is partly due to the fact that no visible wound is left on the body of the prisoner when time is used as an instrument of torture. Pain is usually defined as psychic or as physical pain, even though emotional, social, and psychic pain share the same neural circuitry as bodily pain. 1. Solitary confinement as detemporalization. Solitary confinement as a punitive carceral practice has its roots in a late 18th century penal ideology first developed by Quakers, which eventually became known as the Pennsylvania system. So the diagram on the left of the drawing is of Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, and it was opened in 1829. And as you can see, it has a radial design, so it shares some architectural principles with Bentham's panopticon design. So there's a central watchtower in the middle, and then there are spokes coming off the central tower. And you can see in the picture on the right that off the spokes were individual cells, and at the top of each individual cell was a skylight that was supposed to represent the eye of God. So the idea, according to the people who created this design, was that you would internalize the feeling of being watched by God and thus would repent. But what ultimately happened was solitary confinement drove people crazy, so it was kind of a colossal failure. But this design did get exported around the world. Although the use of solitary confinement never completely vanished from the American prison landscape, after the failure of the Pennsylvania system experiments in the 19th century, solitary confinement was a marginal carceral practice until it was revived beginning in the 1970s with the rise of supermax prisons and the creation of control units and security housing units, or SHUs. Black, Native, and Puerto Rican militants, as well as white leftists, have argued that the revival of solitary confinement practices was tied to the deliberate weaponization of isolation as an attempt to psychically break and punish political prisoners through a process that aimed to dismantle their personalities and worldviews. Militant women held at the Lexington Control Unit in Kentucky argued that the state was carrying out psychological experimentation on them that amounted to torture and sought to neutralize them. Although this carceral practice was initially used on political prisoners, it has become a normalized feature of the U.S.'s criminal legal system, even though the U.S. falsely claims that solitary confinement is not practiced in its prisons. Solitary confinement may appear to be a practice primarily aimed at the spatial regulation of prisoners. However, it is inextricably tied to the axis of time. While solitary confinement denies prisoners access to all embodied modes of relationality by physically removing them from their social context, it also aims to distort the prisoner's perception of time and undermine their sense of time altogether. Solitary confinement robs people of their temporal agency by imposing a rigid carceral time that is punctuated by meals, shower time, and, if allowed at all, recreation time. In written accounts of solitary confinement, prisoners frequently write about losing all sense of time, hallucinating, losing the ability to think a complete thought or formulate a complete sentence, getting stuck in thought loops, and experiencing depersonalization. In her phenomenological analysis of solitary confinement, Lisa Gunther writes, quote, "There is a great risk for prisoners in prolonged solitary confinement to get stuck in a moment that goes nowhere, closed into a circular repetition of the same," end quote. Furthermore, solitary confinement can also undermine a subject's capacity to use language or to sequentialize in words. Ulrika Meinhof, the Red Army faction militant who was held in a dead wing, which is an entire prison wing devoid of other persons, offered this description of solitary, quote, "Sentences, grammar, syntax, no longer controllable. When you're writing 2 lines at the end of the second, you cannot remember how the first one began. A complete inability to communicate. Visits leave no impression. Half an hour later, you can only reconstruct mechanically whether the visit happened today or last week," end quote. In Meinhof's account, The subject who experiences time has collapsed. The distinction between days and weeks no longer holds. In supermax prisons, where prisoners are often held in windowless cells and are subjected to artificial light 24 hours a day, prisoners are forcibly detached from their diurnal rhythms and often lose track of the days. While working for the LGBTQ prison abolitionist organization Black and Pink, prisoners in solitary requested that we include a calendar in our newspaper so that they could have a way of keeping track of the passing of days. Despite the imposition of this brutal carceral temporality, prisoners have developed strategies to control, experience, and mark the passing of time, which are strategies that defend against detemporalization. Gunther writes, quote, "Most prisoners will tell you that in order to do the time, rather than allowing the time to do you, one needs to develop a daily schedule," end quote. Thus, time is a terrain of struggle, a field that is constantly negotiated. In a study of how older women in prison negotiate and experience time, Azrini Wahidin and Shirley Tate write, quote, "The women in the study interact with time by making time digestible, ticking off months, weeks, and even days. It was found that the women built their own subjective clock in order to protect themselves from the terror of interminable prison time," end quote. Long-term prisoners may try to ward off the inscription of time on the body by exercising and regulating food intake. And if you've read any prison memoirs, such as George Jackson's Soledad Brother, this is something that comes up a lot in his prison letters. Is he's like very obsessed with exercising. And actually, when I was in Angela Davis's papers this summer, doing research on her for an exhibition, I was reading through some of her prison letters because I always knew that she was obsessed with yoga, and I saw that she actually developed her interest in yoga when she was in prison, and it was like a way of trying to take back, control of her mind, body, and temporalization. 2, mass incarceration sentencing regime. In Dissonance in Time, Unmaking and Remapping of Blackness, Damien M. Sojourner writes, quote, "The annals of late 20th and early 21st century judicial records provide evidence of the imposition of time. The common sense connection between time and incarceration are evident in how time is invoked as a possessive action. Just put your head down and do your time. How much time did you get? Will I get credit for time served? Where do I have to do my time? The application of time as a disciplinary mechanism of power has been key to the corralling of Black freedom," end quote. Not only have sentences gotten longer in the era of mass incarceration, there has been a qualitative shift in how prisoners are allowed to spend their time. The lock them up and throw away the key approach that superseded the rehabilitative model is characterized by the imposition of idleness. Yet hard time is not equally distributed. Numerous studies have shown that Black people are given longer sentences than white people. Even within the Black population, skin tone is correlated to sentence length. a study of skin tone and sentence length that looked at Black women found that, quote, the relationship between skin tone and prison time for Black women were consistent with those of earlier studies focusing on the experiences of Black men. Controlling for several factors, Black women perceived as having lighter skin receive less of a prison sentence and serve less time behind bars, end quote. Thus, the temporality of punishment itself is racialized. Having dark skin increases the distance between the prisoner and the horizon that marks the end of the sentence. Although time is intangible, it becomes directly inscribed on the racialized body. 3. Predictive policing and invocations of the future. With the explosion of data science and the increasing deployment of predictive policing software, we are now witnessing a transformation in the temporality of policing. Policing is no longer primarily aimed at responding to crime, but anticipating and preventing it. This anticipatory dimension of policing has always been present, but until recently, the judgment of the police officer was considered superior to that of machines. As self-learning AI systems are refined and our faith in machines and predictive analytics increases, we are relinquishing more and more decision-making power to the algorithms. What are the chances a parolee will be a recidivist? Where should police patrol? Whom should the police be monitoring? Increasingly, these decisions are being made algorithmically, sometimes with software that analyzes police data to make such predictions. But predictions are much more about constructing the future through the present management of subjects categorized as threats or risks. Thus, predictions do much more than present us with a probable outcome. They enact the future. The transformation of the temporality of policing with the advent of predictive policing turns the unknowability of the future into a problem that justifies the state's management of the future through the technical overcoming of uncertainty. In the age of big data, uncertainty is presented as an information problem that can be overcome with comprehensive data collection, statistical analysis that can identify patterns and relationships, and algorithms that can determine future outcomes by analyzing past outcomes. Predictive policing promises to remove the existential terror of not knowing what is going to happen by using data to deliver accurate knowledge about where and when crime will occur. Data installs itself as a solution to the problem of uncertainty by claiming to achieve total awareness and overcome human analytical limitations. In November of 2018, so this is only a few months ago, tech philosopher Nick Bostrom published a working paper titled The Vulnerable World Hypothesis, in which he calls for the creation of a, quote, high-tech panopticon consisting of the establishment of global governance and the continuous real-time surveillance of every living person on the planet. Bostrom, who is best known for his warnings about the dangers of AI in his book Superintelligence, as well as his influence on tech bigwigs such as Bill Gates and Elon Musk, now believes that the risk of apocalypse that accompanies technological development is so high that it warrants turning the planet into a giant prison managed by those who govern. His probabilistic assertions about the inevitability of such an apocalypse are based on a thought experiment. If the urn of creativity, which represents technological development, produces both white and black balls, white represents inventions that benefit humanity, black represents inventions that can destroy it, it is only a matter of time before we pull a black ball from the urn. So if you are familiar with these like probabilistic thought experiments, the urn is like the metaphor that is always used. So as technology develops, the means of mass destruction, such as DIY biohacking, becomes increasingly accessible, and the likelihood that someone will exercise this destructive potential increases to the point where self-destruction eventually becomes inevitable. According to Bostrom, the only way to militate against such an outcome is to exit the default semi-anarchic conditions by creating a preventive regime of high-tech social control. Quote, everybody is fitted with a freedom tag, a sequent to the more limited wearable surveillance devices familiar today, such as the ankle tag used in several countries as a prison alternative, the body cams worn by many police forces, the pocket trackers and wristbands that some parents use to keep track of their children, and, of course, the ubiquitous cell phone. The freedom tag is a slightly more advanced appliance, worn around the neck and bedecked with multi-directional cameras and microphones. Encrypted video and audio is continuously uploaded from the device to the cloud and machine interpreted in real time. AI algorithms classify the activities of the wearer, his hand movements, nearby objects, and other situational cues. If suspicious activity is detected, the feed is relayed to one of several Patriot monitoring stations. These are vast office complexes staffed 24/7. There, a freedom officer reviews the video feed on several screens and listens to the audio in headphones. The freedom officer can also dispatch an inspector, a police rapid response unit, or a drone to investigate further. In the small fraction of cases where the wearer refuses to desist from the prescribed activity after repeated warnings, an arrest may be made or other suitable penalties imposed. Citizens are not permitted to remove the freedom tag except while they are in environments that have been outfitted with adequate external sensors, end quote. By calling the surveillance apparatus a freedom tag, the all-encompassing police state is recast as the ultimate guarantor of humanity's collective freedom. It is hard not to read his phraseology as self-parody that harkens back to the freedom fries idioms of the Bush era. But Bostrom is sincere in his proposal. He estimates that this ubiquitous system of surveillance would only cost $140 USD per person per year, which he calculates would amount to less than 1% of the world's annual GDP. So there's this interesting moment where he tries to do the cross-benefit analysis, and he's like, less than 1% of GDP is a lot less than civilizational annihilation, so it makes sense. When we crunch the numbers, it just makes sense. If there is not enough political will or state capacity to implement such a system, another measure that could be attempted in the absence of a fully universal monitoring system might include, quote, adopting a policy of preemptive incarceration, end quote. Bostrom's freedom tag proposal is hardly surprising when we consider how debates about e-carceration are playing out in the domain of prison reform. Even some prison abolitionists have argued that the use of e-carceration, such as GPS ankle monitoring devices, is a humane alternative to confinement. What Bostrom's proposal represents is merely a generalization of the same preemptive techniques of managing risk. What is unique about Bostrom's proposal is his amplification of the stakes. The preservation of civilization itself depends on the absolute concentration of power and the creation of a unipolar world. Never mind the risk of concentrating the power to surveil the planet in the hands of a global state. The danger in Bostrom's scenario is the plebs. It is hypothetical rogue actors who would have no scruples about wiping out society, extremists, the mentally ill, and antisocial belligerents, not the capitalists and technocrats who actually control the means of civilizational annihilation. In the high-tech panopticon, deviance itself must be neutralized. For anyone who does not possess a normative identity, worldview, or temperament is a potential threat insofar as they might not be invested in the preservation of the society that excludes them. The predictive regime has as its ultimate aim the elimination of difference, for otherness is seen as inherently risky. But paranoia feeds on itself. It is self-fulfilling. Eventually, paranoia can attach itself to any object and poison every area of social life. In the vulnerable world imagined by Bostrom, every living, breathing person on the planet is a potential risk. Paranoia is the underside of power, and power is self-preserving. With technological development comes the consolidation of power, but also, or so the paranoid tech ethicists claim, the multiplication of risks and vulnerabilities. Thus, doomsayers like Bostrom have constructed a teleological view of technology that serves as the justification for techno-fascism. Left unchecked, this ideology would justify turning the world into a prison. 4. Time maroons and other temporal renegades. Damien M. Sojourner writes, quote, "Black radical time is not something that is employed to be inflicted upon people," end quote. In the post-industrial, post-apocalyptic urban cityscape of Philadelphia, a collective of Black artists, writers, and musicians are dreaming up new temporal modes and practices of being in the world that draw from quantum physics, African cosmologies, Afrofuturism, and the Black radical tradition. The Black Quantum Futurism Collective, or BQF, was founded by lawyer and sci-fi writer Rashida Phillips and musician and poet Moormother. The collective engages in community memory work that brings people together to unearth and document lost histories of Black Philadelphia neighborhoods that are in the process of being gentrified. The goal of BQF is to develop, quote, a new approach to living and experiencing reality by way of the manipulation of space-time in order to see into possible futures and or collapse space-time into a desired future in order to bring about that future's reality, end quote. To give you a sense of their work, I'm going to play a short video of Moormother performing. I first encountered BQF when I saw Moormother perform at a queer dance party fundraiser event in Philly. During an event, Moormother performed a hybrid set consisting of spoken words and shrieking over loud, ominous electronic sounds. The lyrics revolved around the themes of grief, anger, premature death, anti-Black violence, and ghosts. What Moormother was doing was a kind of time sorcery that sought to bring the past in contact with the present and the future, to merge them through sound that sought to, quote, sing the graves open, end quote. Embedded in BQF's aesthetic and political practice is a critique of Western notions of time that conceptualize of time as linear and organized around the discrete categories of past, present, and future. For BQF, contemporary notions of time are intimately tied to the entwined histories of capitalism and slavery. When describing a BQF Community Futures Lab workshop, Art in America critic Michael McCain writes, quote, Phillips detailed how European Judeo-Christian traditions experienced time as an inevitable flow towards a divinely ordained future. She continued to explain how capitalism incorporated this future-oriented linearity into labor and production as it began to regulate time more precisely through mechanical clocks, calendars, and bells. This was assimilated into slavery in the Americas as masters moved from nature-based timekeeping to mechanical clock time. Slave owners wrote books detailing how many hours a slave should work to achieve the most profit and how to maximize efficiency using clock-based schedules enforced by physical punishments. With emancipation, slavery came to an end, but the powerful rhythms and logic of mechanical time remained, end quote. To counter the rigid temporalities that originated in capitalism and slavery, BQF have created a practice of time marronage, where the rules of clock time are subverted by practices that imaginatively summon ancestors, conjure ghosts, project practitioners into the future, and amalgamate the past, present, and future in order to create new political openings. These time renegades demonstrate that becoming ungovernable by resisting the imposition of violent temporalities is a cornerstone of Black freedom. 5. The politics of dreaming. Everywhere I look, I see sleepwalkers under the spell of the prison and the imposition of carceral time. The prison is a problem for thought that can only be unthought using a mode of thinking that does not capitulate to the realism of the present. What counterspell is powerful enough to break the prison stranglehold on our imaginations? But the spell is never total. The intensification of the desire for life undermines the prison's capacity to structure our mental lives. Imagination is excess, is that which could never be contained by the prison, that which will always exceed it. What night endeavors must we embrace to enter that hidden frequency, that special vibration, the one Sun Ra believed would set us free? When dream becomes a hammer, we summon to shatter the realism of the prison. Assata Shakur, a Black revolutionary who lives in exile in Cuba, writes, quote, "Dreams and reality are opposites. Action synthesizes them," end quote. Before Assata was liberated from prison, her grandmother and family came to visit her bearing a dream. "You're coming home soon," her grandmother said. "I don't know when it will be, but you're coming home. You're getting out of here. It won't be too long, though." She went on, "I dreamed we were in our old house in Jamaica. I was dressing you, putting your clothes on." Assata's grandmother was known for her prophetic dreams. They came when they were needed, but it was ultimately the responsibility of the recipients of the visions to make them real, not only by believing in the veracity of the prophecies, but by acting so as to give them flesh. When Assata returned to her prison cell, she could not help but dance and sing. She writes, "No amount of scientific, rational thinking could diminish the high that I felt. A tingly, giddy excitement had caught hold of me. I had gotten drunk on my family's arrogant, carefree optimism. I literally danced in my cell singing, 'Feet don't fail me now.' I sang the feet part real low, so I guess the guards must have thought I was bugging out, stomping around my cage singing, 'Feet, feet.'" When we act in accordance with the prophetic dream, the dream comes to directly constitute reality. Six, the rhythm of revolt. Sometimes I don't know what to tell you or how to end. For some time I've been thinking about how to convey the message of police and prison abolition, but I know that as a poet, it is not my job to win you over with a persuasive argument, but to impart to you a vibrational experience that is capable of awakening your desire for another world. A few years ago, I saw the Black Arts Movement poet and activist Sonia Sanchez speak. I was moved by the way she paused whenever she experienced vertigo and spontaneously started singing as a way to find her rhythm after nearly passing out. In a haiku, Sonia writes, "Without your residential breath, I lose my timing." Our bodies are not closed loops. We hold each other and keep each other in time by marching, dancing, singing, breathing. We synchronize our tempos so we can find a rhythm through which the urge to live can be expressed collectively. And in this way, we set the world in motion. In this way, poets become the timekeepers of the revolution. 7. Planting the dream. In Freedom Dreams, the Black Radical Imagination, Robin D.G. Kelley writes, quote, "What shall we build on the ashes of a nightmare?" I won't propose much more, since the design and realization of such a space ought to be the product of a collective imagination, shaped and reshaped by the very process of turning rubble and memory into the seeds of a new society. End quote. I see our shadow in the trees, watching the wheel unfold. I see our one shadow on the wall. I see your restless hand in the spider's thread. I am the ice cave, and there is water, deep blue and white, a light at the bottom. I am equal to my love for you. Let down your hair, willow in the moonlight. The river lulls us into the dream. Nightmares jostle branches in our eyes. I long for the world that is before you, the plate you set on the slate of tomorrow. Your fingers flutter to feel for the grass between the valley, where one foot follows the other into the flaming creek. We don't know what name to give the throbbing stone perched atop the hill. From here, I see for you. Look at what I lost when you were lost, and I could only hear the call of the stones. A body returned, floats down the river dressed in candles. I send you the secret while you are asleep. The nights you carried and the length of a strand of hair. The unforgiving flash of his teeth. I stroke your cheek to unlock your jaw and release the rose you carry in your mouth. Your tongue is raw and your mouth is filling with blood. Dear, dear, forgive us for having fallen so far from where you planted the seed. At the bottom of the sea, waiting for the body to ride the stream back to where the rubble gave birth to the first dream. The egg cracks, night wanders seaward, barefoot in her evening slip. And by this sadness you are shown the path to the holding sea. a trail burned by a herd of somnambulant turtles who folded one by one in their grief until a single remained to carry the breath of time back to the seed. Thank you. So should we, I'll be around to hang out for a little bit because I think we're basically out of time here. But yeah, come talk to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much. And thank you also for the organizers of Interrupt as well.
Yeah, please join us in the Granoff Steely lobby for a reception. And come back tomorrow for more Interrupt Festival. Thank you, everyone.